Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everybody who's attending around the world. Welcome to this citizen development session. It is our third session of Citizen Development Week, and we are going to talk about getting started with citizen development, practical tips and resources. I'm Matt Hubbard. I'm going to be moderating, but I want to tell you, I am not a professional moderator, but I am a citizen developer, and we can do anything. So let's give this a shot, but please give me some grace if my moderation is not the greatest. Fortunately, I feel like I've got an all-star lineup here of panelists, as we've got Phil Lake, and he's the co-founder and CEO at No Code Ops and Switchboard. Kevin Schuler, he's the owner and CEO at Quandary Consulting Group, and Hugo Lim, the VP of Customer Success at Jogit. Now, Phil, I just hold him in super high regard. He can think on the spot. He's a good storyteller, and he runs one of the best citizen development communities in the world, No Code Ops. Okay, so props to him. And then we've got Kevin Schuler, who I'm a big fan of. So I'm a little giddy here because he's, in my view, one of the best thought leaders in citizen development. So if you haven't followed him on LinkedIn, you'll want to do so and read the articles that he posts because it's very insightful. And then Hugo he is part of this technology trend called low code, no code. He works for Jogit. Jogit is a low code, no code platform, and that's what makes citizen development possible. So with these three folks, how could we go wrong? Now, I'm going to get us started. We've got some questions that we prepared in advance, and these guys read those questions ahead of time. But I'm going to start off with a curveball. This is a question that wasn't listed. Okay, I like to start with stories, and so we're talking about getting started with citizen development. This is all about getting started. This is not about becoming a 5-year veteran of citizen development. This is getting started. So Phil, I'm going to start with you. Your background, I found out, is very interesting. You were an actor. Maybe you're still an actor. How did you get started in citizen development from acting?
It is a good question. And thanks for having thanks for having me. So excited to be here. My whole life, I was an actor for years and years and years. I was in my first commercial at like 2 months old, not by choice, but and then did it for years and years. Everything from like films and like Kensington Tribeca Film Festival to Law and Order and Gossip Girl. And when I was an actor, I was a severely mediocre waiter when I was living in New York, and so I never really like climbed the ranks of being like a really like 5-star dining waiter. And so for my side gig, I did a lot of guerrilla marketing and promotions. And then that led me to start my own company on that front. We worked with a lot of B2C tech companies doing like street team marketing for companies like Get and Fever and SeatGeek. And then one of our clients, Get, an Israeli-based Uber competitor, made an offer to acqui-hire us. And when we were there, they asked me to build a street team and an app for the street team that we could recruit rideshare drivers with. And I said, cool, with what tech team? They go, no, you work in operations, my friend. You're your own tech team. And that's where I acted like I knew what I was doing and figured out how to use no and low code tools. And that began my kind of whole journey into no and low code. And so here I am.
You said you figured it out. How did you figure it out? What, you don't have to tell us the full story, but why were you able to do that?
Yeah. So, my thinking was that like everything was done with pen and paper at the time for onboarding drivers. So anything I did digitally was like an improvement. And so I just started experimenting. The first experiment was figuring out like, okay, can I get, V1 was, can we just do this digitally? And so I, used HelloSign at the time, which is now owned by Dropbox. And that worked. But then it was all about getting, like getting that to work in the field, because we would recruit a lot of drivers like the airport parking lots at LaGuardia and JFK in New York. And so, a driver would be halfway through filling out their form and then it would crash and have to like restart it over. And so we found a company called Pronto Forms, that just solved the need of being able to A, sync offline, and B, you could collect things via a web form, and it would put that onto the PDF contract that we needed for compliance. And so it just grew and grew on top, needs based, right? So, and then we needed to get all of that data into Google Sheets. So we use Zapier, right? So it just grew based on that and like what I could do without a developer.
That's what I love about citizen development. And Hugo, what you're doing with Jogga is you're creating tools that makes this possible. We can, without a coding background, have a need and then go find a tool online and start experimenting with it and solve those problems. Hugo, how did you get involved with citizen development?
Very good questions. So I came from a background where I joined as a technical developers, and we are going through months to months implementing project, right? So that's pro code. So one day, one of our co-colleague, Julian's, says that we've been doing this forever. How can we do this differently? So that was back in 2009, right, where we tried to create our own frameworks or create our own no code platform, right? So citizen developers wasn't a term that's coined yet, right? So we were trying to break free from the day to day, right? Implementing projects from scratch again and again. So that's where the seed planted and started as way back. Yeah. So. So I happen to also be fortunate enough. I was one of the co-founder for Joget, and we grew and grew since then. Yeah, so here we are today.
So you have a technical background. Citizen development, we're not exclusionary, right? We're not going to exclude you because you have a technical background. Instead, we need each other, people with who can do pro dev and those who are citizen developers, because these platforms would not exist without pro developers, right? And pro developers also want to do things faster. They don't want to code the same stuff from scratch every single time. So thank you. I'm glad you're here. Kevin, how about you? How did you get started in low code, no code, and citizen development?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I have no development background, so you guys worlds ahead of me in that regard. But started out doing some development actually on TrackVia myself to start with, and then worked my way up to starting Quandary Consulting Group, where we enable citizen developers to go into the enterprise and develop applications from scratch in a record time, right? So we can do it in fraction of the time, fraction of the cost, and also turn it over to the client themselves to manage and grow their citizen development groups by way of a single application, usually as the entry point, and then growing it organically throughout because it's such a high value and low cost.
Okay. All right, great. Well, now we're going to pivot. I'm going to get a little formal here. We'll go back to the standard questions that we developed. But Kevin, I'm just going to kind of pick up with you. What are some considerations for identifying business needs that can be addressed through citizen development?
Yeah, I mean, this is step one of every engagement we work with our customers. So there is always a business need. That's the beauty of innovation is 90% of the time we go into a client experience where there's going to be some kind of legacy system. There's going to be some kind of monolith. There's going to be some type of offline, and all of that needs to be tied together. So what I do is I encourage, basic architecture from a development perspective, understanding how relational databases work, understanding how the architecture of an application could be built, right? So you can have that foundation. And then once working through that, we identify from a business perspective, we go through a list of essentially there's a quadrant with high impact, high cost, all the way down to low impact, low cost. And so with that, we can identify initiatives or projects that can be done. What we like to focus on are high impact, low time, low cost. And so we can basically go through and knock those out quickly. And so Excel, other types of non-integrated, non-connected systems or tools are a great way to start that. And then essentially working through our checklist that we have to enable the end users to either take that on their own or bring in more professional citizen developers, if you will, working on a low-code, no-code platform.
Okay. All right. Very good. Phil, how about you?
Yeah, so for me, it's always you typically don't have to search for the needs because they've slapped you in the face a few times on the operations end, where they are all the things you've asked developers for that they just don't have time for, typically. And so it's all like the internal dashboards and workflows, and put it like this: I say that the needs for me on citizen development typically live at the intersection of what are things that our department wants to stay close to as things change with them, as opposed to just like get it built once and then it's done. Because the more change, the more velocity of change that you need, the closer that should be to the department that owns the outcomes of that process. And so it's typically right there. And then it's like what can be done with either third-party platforms or like low-code, no-code tools that we can achieve and manage on our own that our IT team is signed off on. And typically what I'll do in that moment is I will come up with like some solutions and show like, hey, here's like how we could do this thing and start building momentum behind it, and trying to start solving it on my own with dummy data, and then use that as momentum to get buy-in. Because it's like, I want to tell the dev team, like, you don't want to own this thing. Like, you don't want to deal with me. I'm a pain in the ass, like I'm going to ask for a lot of changes. Like, and so just let us own it with your blessing. Yeah. So that's where I find the needs typically.
I'm going to piggyback on that just a little bit, Phil. When I first started thinking about using technology to control business processes, IT asked me, what are your requirements? And I'm like, I think they're this. And they're like, no. I got to know like exactly what you want, because that's what I'm going to program. And you're not going to get another shot at this. Like this is it. And so
so high risk.
Right. And I quickly learned that like the truth is I don't know what I want until I see it, until I've experimented with it, and then even used it a little bit in the real world to validate if it works. And so like change will happen. That's just a fact until I've stabilized that process and used a solution. Do you encounter anything similar?
Yeah, same thing. And like, I think that with no coders and citizen developers, we like to try before we buy. We like to experiment, get our hands dirty. And I think that in the world of custom application development, that's considered a liability. But in the world of operations, that's actually considered an asset. And the reason it's liability for custom code is like, you do have to come up with PRDs. You do have to develop these huge things because there's so much time and energy going into custom developing something that you don't want to get it wrong, or you want to get as little wrong as possible. Whereas in the world of like minimum viable processes and like, just using certain pieces of SaaS to solve certain needs, you can move so fast that if something doesn't work, you just ditch it and move on, or rip it and replace it with something else. And so I think that because we can move so fast, like we do want to see how these things work in real time and play with them. And like, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And so,
it's almost like it's okay to be wrong, right? It's okay if you are wrong, because we can change, we can adjust.
Right. It's not okay if you're wrong, if you're writing a PRD that's going to take like 5 sprints of your dev team to build an internal tool. It is great to be wrong when you're just messing with a freemium PLG tool.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of landing on a point here, is that yes, citizen development can be used to develop your own applications that you'll use in production, but it's actually also not a bad thing to kind of figure out what you think you'll need before you approach IT. Get your ducks in a row. Hugo, same question. What are your thoughts about considerations for identifying business needs that can be addressed through CD?
Great questions. Right. So, like you say, and I echo what Kevin said earlier as well. Right. So, makes between the impacts and the difficulties. And being able to pivot, and essentially what we are doing is that we will never get the requirement right. So So therefore, we cannot go to ITs and ITs will then insist, right? Do you have the full requirements? We require the full requirements before we can do anything at all, right? So things don't work that way. Business users do not have the full requirements, although they are the business process owners, but they are never ever put in place to be able to give that kind of requirements to the IT teams, right? So they are living without knowing. They're actually living day to day, actually practicing all those steps, but never on the paper, on the technical documentations that the IT team requires. So there's a balance on, and choosing a citizen development platforms by going through the motions, right, will actually help them to solidify the what is impactful, what is feasible, right, to be developed upon, right. So there's always a balance between what if it is too big of a problem to be solved, whether it involves securities and requires a blessing from the IT, right? If there's any integrations with externals involved in there, so we need to be able to size it, right, and implement accordingly. I hope I'm making a point here.
You are. In fact, Hugo, I want to lean on something specific that you said. You said a problem that's too difficult to solve. So I think Kevin kind of alluded to this as well, is when we are getting started, especially if this is the first time we've built an app, we need to think about difficulty. Like, yes, citizen development through low-code, no-code platforms, you can develop solutions for very complicated things, but don't start there. If you start there, I think you'll get frustrated. I think you'll think it doesn't work very well, and you'll abandon the path. My recommendation is think big, start small, and then build on that, scale fast. So what are some examples of this whole starting small, starting simple that you would recommend to somebody who's maybe thinking about building their first app? What are some easy examples out there? I'm throwing that out to the whole group, like anything that you think of. Just to get it rolling, I'll throw one out there. Like, if you are tracking something daily in a spreadsheet, like tasks, I did that a lot before I learned low code, no code. We've got things that need to be done. They have a date that they need to be done, and they're assigned to somebody. And then I'm constantly chasing those things down, asking people, hey, is this thing done? Can you update your status? That, as a one table spreadsheet, is a super easy app to start with. And most of these low code, no code platforms, you can just import that spreadsheet into the platform. It's practically 80% built for you at that point. And then you just layer on some functionality, like some filtered views of incomplete tasks, and maybe even some notifications that give people a heads up. Hey, these are the things that are supposed to be done this week. Please act on these. So that's actually just a seed that started. But yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Matt, right. One of the best high value add, low effort things on like no code in the enterprise that I find is just, it's even smaller than that, which is just the right notifications to the right people at the right time is so valuable. So as an example, if there's a spreadsheet you want updated by folks, right, just sending them to the link, to the link of that, asking them to do the thing at the right time automatically is so valuable. Sending that out once a week, or when somebody updates a status, letting other people know automatically, like when this status changes, ping this person, or when it's once a week at this time, ping these people to do this thing. Like those types of employees at companies are just like users who are outside of the companies. They're busy. They're not thinking about this stuff as much as you're thinking about it. They're not thinking about like your process and the adherence to the process as much as you are. And so the more you can do with no code internally to treat internal folks like external users and make it easy for them and give them the right context, the right time to do the desired action with small notifications that are built with no code, man, that stuff goes a long way. Like one thing we did at Compass was we always wanted, we'd have like these emails that we would send out to the whole company, to our whole department with like updates, and no one would read them. And we'd work so hard on these things. Like, here's all the process updates. Here's all the things that we did. And like, no one would read these things. And so what we did was we found a no-code kind of platform called Pulse. I think it's like Pulse Async or Pulse.so. I can't remember which. Maybe they're both. And all it did was it was company-wide announcements that you could put in the new tab when anyone opened a new tab in Chrome on your team. So whenever you open a new tab, it would be right there and the announcement would be there and you could click if you had questions about it or if you confirmed that you read it. So we could see who opened it, who confirmed that they read it, right? And it would always be right in line for easy for people to find. Like it's those simple kind of things that go, I think, a really long way.
Agreed. And there's so much of that out there for us to do. We do not have to develop cross-functional enterprise scale applications to start and get value. There are just simple things every day. Kevin or Hugo, any examples?
Yeah, I was just going to build on yours, Matt. I tell people really the 3Ds to get started, right? Dates, dollars, and details. Get those all put in there because most times you're going to have an Excel sheet, a single tab, multi-tab. You're going to have a complex piece. I mean, I've worked in some massive Excel sheets that are multiple gigs, right, with hundreds of versions floating all over the intranet, and all of a sudden someone changes a cell and the whole thing goes down, right? That is a great example of where you can build to, but you can start with a single page of just the dates, the dollars, and details to help organize that data and get it all put in one place so that way it can be shared in real time across the organization. And so as you get more familiar with what goes in there, who's using it, and where it's going to go, to the point of notifications, I mean, all of that's going to be built into the platform you're using. And so tying that together, and someone changes something and updates something else and sends it to somebody else, all that's done automatically. So you don't have to send an email, right? That's high impact. That's really low cost from a time perspective. And so I love the idea of just starting small, because as you get more familiar, you are building multinational enterprise level systems in low code that are being used every day by thousands of users. And you can do that in a year or less as a citizen developer. So, I mean, it's just fascinating, that growth curve. It seems super intimidating at first, but just start with those 3Ds and you'll get going right off the bat.
Oh, fantastic. 3Ds, is that copyrighted?
It is now.
It is now? Okay. I learned something.
It is now.
I like that. Dates, dollars, and details. I'll move on to the next question in a second here, but I just wanted to throw some numbers to kind of tie this out. One of the first significant apps that I built as a citizen developer did just what you're describing. It got the dates, dollars, and details out there, sent emails automatically, and created reports automatically. So I was no longer doing that manual. And the numbers are this. It took me 8 hours to build that app, but it saved me 200 hours of manually chasing stuff down every single year. And on top of that, it was done the same way perfectly every time. That's what computers can do. I can't do that. All right, let's go to the next question.
Matt, can I piggyback on that? That is the number one thing that we run into, whether it's professional citizen developers, it's our clients, it's end users as citizen developers. Track your ROI. That is the most underrated metric. Is people think that, oh, this is going to take me a day, a week, a month to build, but they don't know the impact to the organization, right? That's a promotion right there for you as a citizen developer. That's a raise. That's something that you can take to your next step, wherever that is. But if you just go through the motions because it's natural for you to develop, and you forget how much impact you're making to the business, to the end users, to the space that you're working in, I mean, you're devaluing yourself as an individual. So remember, this is the journey about you as a citizen developer as a whole. So Matt, that was perfect. The 8 hours to 200 hours, you do that every day. I mean, you can just see the dollars lining up for the bottom line for your company, which allows you to go asking for more.
Kevin, perfect segue to a session later this week. I'm going by memory. I want to say that it's the last session of the week on Friday. It might be the one on Thursday, but Mike McCullough, if you're on the line, he's going to be doing that session. Mike, he's at Amtrak, and he has scaled up citizen development at his company. And he has built into the governance process an ROI calculator that calculates how much time were you spending before the app and how much time after the app. And then you can go back and create reports on that at any time to say the impact of these citizen development projects. So yeah, spot on. All right, next question. So now we're going to get a little more formal. Is there a checklist of items that can be used to verify readiness to adopt CD? And I'm just going to let somebody raise their hand on this to see who has a strong opinion.
I'll start it off.
All right.
There is an established citizen development organizations or companies that are ready to be ready, right? So if you're not sure if this is the right path or anything like that, it's a good place to start to create one for your organization. We have a process in place that we take to every customer that is considering going down the path of bringing in a citizen development group into their organization. And it goes through exactly the governance, the ROI, it goes through the users, it goes through the platforms, it goes through anything and everything that you could think of as far as going into the deep end, because we've already listed a handful of tools, just not name dropping, but just in passing, right? I think I saw a stat last year, 100,000 new SaaS platforms are coming into market every year. This was 2 years ago. And they were anticipating like 10 million or something that have come and gone in a 10-year span. I mean, it's insane, the number of tools and platforms. So from a governance perspective, one of the reasons I've found in my experience that citizen development has a hard time getting off the ground is because it's still considered shadow IT from an IT perspective. So what that takes away from it is the value, because there is no governance, there are no rules, there is sprawl because this group uses these 17 tools, this group uses these 42 tools, and next thing you know, there's no standardization, and the technical debt is actually heavier because it's wider than it is deeper to the organization as a whole. So considering a platform of choice or a handful of small touch platforms is going to be one of your entry points, but absolutely going through the list of why, because you're going to have to justify it to somebody, whether it's just to yourself. So I highly recommend going through and either creating or bringing in a checklist before you jump into the deep end. If you're going to do a single application as a test pilot, Philip's talking about, awesome, that's great. You don't need to go down that path, right? But if you're going to bring in citizen development as an organizational change, you're absolutely going to have to go on a more professional-esque path, I guess.
I think you made an important distinction. Citizen development kind of has two sides to it. One is the individual becoming a citizen developer and building apps. The other is the organization scaling that capability up. I think those are two different things, and they excuse me, they require two different skill sets. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think those are definitely two different things. One's, of course, more grassroots, and the other's a little bit more top down. But I do think that they inform each other and inspire each other, right? I often see companies making the move to wanting to have more citizen development formal practices because a certain department or a certain group of folks moved really, really fast at doing something with that little or no dev support, just based on a need. And they're like, wow, this, like, people really want this. And so I've seen it happen both ways. But yes, at a certain scale, like, there does need to be best practices, a center of excellence around this stuff, because if you have, 10 departments and they're all running their own micro citizen development, individual needs programs, there's a lot of redundancy, a lot of overlap. Like, there's learnings that aren't getting captured that can be shared between different folks, more security, vulnerability risks, right? Like, you need to have like some best practices. Like, that's why I love what PMI has done. And Vivek mentioned it earlier in the comments. Like, I love what PMI is doing here around, saying, hey, like, if your company is thinking about citizen development at a larger level than just a person or a department and wants to inspire multiple people to do these things, then yes, there is a blueprint on how to do this stuff.
Yeah. So to add on to that, yeah. So to add on to just what Philip says, that individually and organizations wise, it's vastly different, right? So and often there will be shadow ITs as well, right, happening. But what the core IT teams can do is to come up and to provide the IT guardrails, right? Because as you innovate, you may be breaching, or you may be tiptoeing on securities or data protections on compliance issue, right? So that's where IT would come in, and it is a cultural change as well, right? So the IT, instead of blocking or preventing, they should be providing the supporting the supporting layers, right, to provide guardrails to protections, right, and so that like you say, right, all the departments won't be inventing and going in its own directions, right? So the IT guardrails is very important in there.
I like how you talked about not wanting IT to be a blocker. Okay. I was talking with a CIO and he said, we, IT, have become the department of no. And that is not what makes him proud. He does not want to be the department of no. He wants to change that paradigm to we are an enabler of making the business better. And so he sees adopting and promoting citizen development as championed by IT is a very good thing for the organization, but it does require a shift. Okay. With that, the next question is about the organization side of it. So not the individual practitioner, but the organization adopting citizen development. So how can organizations select suitable projects and execution teams for citizen development initiatives? And Hugo, let's start with you.
Well, let me just piggyback on the example that you just gave earlier. Excel sheet, right? So we have moved from silo, having your own Excel sheet, Excel file being sent across emails that will create hundreds of versions, just like what Kevin's mentioned earlier, right? So actually, organizations and have been embracing this all the while without knowing, right? So we have shifted from sending the Excel file through emails to using Google Sheets or Office 365, right? So therefore, it allows us to collaborate, but it doesn't end here. And again, to echo what all the gentlemen has been saying is that let's automate from the Excel sheet, right? Those data can be imported into low-code, no-code platforms, right? And it will enable so much more, right? So from notifications to alerts to sending triggers, so on and so forth, right? So that would be a good starting point.
Oh, I really like that. Without like overcomplicating this, the suitable projects are those where we're tracking in Excel, and it's time to step up from spreadsheets to low code, no code. That's a good one. Okay. Other thoughts on selecting suitable projects and execution teams. Phil.
Yeah. Look, when it comes to initiatives that like make the most sense here for I guess I'll talk about this from both of those perspectives, right? From an individual level and from a company level, right? So,
Okay.
because from an individual level, it's a bit different, right? So what you typically have is someone, let's just take an example, who works in marketing. They've kind of got like this knack for systems. Maybe they help set up Zapier, maybe they help do some admin, some things in HubSpot, right? But they really like the system side of things. And so over time, they've kind of morphed or started to morph into like the systems person for their team. And they're slowly becoming like the ops person, the marketing ops person, even if they had no clue what that title was or anything like that. And for those types of folks that are slowly shifting from like an IC role on a non-technical team into like the ops role for that team, for those folks, I always say, find something that a suitable project is one that could move the needle on something that your manager and your team cares a lot about. It improves the internal experience of your other team members, and it's something that you are genuinely passionate about. As like from that entrepreneur perspective, like if you can find something that does all of those things and you get buy-in from your manager to take like 20% of your time to tackle that thing, like do that because a rising tide affects all boats, right? Like you'll be more excited about the stuff you're doing day to day. You'll be more passionate about this stuff. And like, you'll think about it at night. Like it'll really put on your entrepreneurial kind of hat. And so I think from the individual level, it's got to have all of those components, from the team level, maybe I'll let someone else kind of like talk to that area. But I've just seen that someone mentioned earlier about how important it is to tie this stuff to ROI. The first question you should ask for any automation project is, does it matter? Right? Like, just because something can be automated doesn't mean it needs to be, right? So building up, like, I've been victim of this. I don't know anyone else here identifies, but like, you know, my name is Phil. I'm like a process addict, right? Like I've spent like 10 hours automating something that saved like 10 minutes, right? Because I was so interested. Anyone else identifies with that, but I do. And so the first thing I try to ask is like, how much impact does this thing have if it gets done? I try to think about that stuff on the team level. I think it's really important, but those are my 4 cents.
Okay, I'll offer the academic side of this. So suitability. PMI recommends some characteristics to look at for suitability, and Shell, who has scaled to 4,500 citizen developers, they have a similar recommendation for suitability. And it's basically looking at risk and complexity. Okay, so you assess the risk, such as the privacy of the information, such as whether it's external data or just internal to just you, et cetera, et cetera. You look at the complexity of, does this need custom coding? Does this need integrations? And you combine those 2 factors to determine how suitable is this for citizen development. If it's not very complex, if it's not very risky, it's okay for a citizen developer to tackle that. If it's slightly more risky or complex, you might want to do that in partnership with IT, but still have citizen developer involvement. And if it's very risky, very complex, let's leave that to the pros and not the citizen developers. Kevin, thoughts on it?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to address one of the questions in the chat because I think it ties it all really well together. Is that from a team perspective, right, and organization perspective, is you need to do a suitability analysis, right, or an impact analysis, or what Matt you were talking about. So you're going to run into situations where IT is just hesitant. It's not in their roadmap. It's not something they want to take on. It's not something that they think is high impact. But good organizations remember that innovation comes from the front line, period, right? And so innovation is what's going to take the companies to the next level. It's what's going to help them scale. It's going to help them win bids, whatever the goal is from the executive perspective. So almost looking at it from an executive initiative list, working down. What is your CEO trying to accomplish this year? What is your executive or your board trying to accomplish this year? And how is this application or this piece of citizen development going to drive towards that, right? If they're in alignment, then you're already on the right path. If they're not in alignment, to Phil's point, and it's just something you want to do as a pet project and it doesn't have high impact, Saturdays and Sundays are a great time for that, right? Improve your skills. I guarantee it's going to make you better down the line, but that's not something that's going to move your company forward. And that's where you get pushback from IT, right? You think about IT as a record label. They're going to go listen to 5 million singles, and all of a sudden they're going to pick 4 to go from. And then that 4 is going to go down to 1, and then 1's going to go live, right? That's what IT is dealing with, is that you are a small piece of that, not in a negative way, but on the major list of initiatives that they're working on. They're doing, some 9-figure implementations in a year, and this one piece is making a huge impact for you, but it's not going to move the needle for the organization. So finding somebody, to the question, bring it full circle, is how do you kind of convince IT is finding a champion that understands how to speak that lingo, right? IT is a language within itself in most organizations. And so working within that from a cost perspective, from a value perspective, is helping them understand how this is going to move that from an executive perspective, and then getting them to buy in. If they don't need to buy in and it's already a citizen development initiative, then working together with your team to make sure that your time is well spent. So it's really thinking bigger than you as a citizen developer. If you're working within an organization, if you have free reign to do whatever, I 100% go back down. Philip hit all the nails on the head from an individual perspective. You want to make sure that what you're doing is going to make sure your job and anyone you're interacting with is easier, better, faster, and stronger. That's it.
So think about value for everybody. The value for yourself, the value for IT, the value for your executives. Okay, good. I tend to talk a lot. We all know that. So I am going to move on to our last 2 questions and try to get those in before we just open it up to general questions. So Hugo, this one is for you. since you are the platform expert, what features should organizations look for when selecting the right CD platform?
Good questions, right? So first and foremost, ease of use, right? Because citizen developers, as the name suggests, may not necessarily come from a background with developing developments, programming skill set, right? So ease of use is very important. Then the next one, I would say scalability, right? So how do you move from a single platforms, silos, right, into something that you would be able to go cross department and scale as you roll out and as you get buy-in from your manager, from the organizations, right? So it needs to count, it needs to be able to scales, right? And security, right, and integrations. These are the two kind of sensitive topics, right? But as a citizen developers, it is something that we must be aware of, right? Because data security, it's first and foremost, right? Very important to even start with. That goes without saying, right? And the ability for the platform to integrate with other connectors or other sites are very important as well, right? There won't be a platforms that sits in a silo, right? So to start off, ease of use, very important. The ability to scales and ability to integrate and has a good securities, right? Would be the 4 points that I would be able to think of on top of my head. Let me pass it to the floor.
Okay, solid advice there. Kevin, any thoughts on features of strong platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest pieces is looking down the line from an integration perspective and automation, right? Is a lot of the citizen development platforms today are going to have basic holding sites, whether it's data like databases or views or however that is. They're going to have user permissions down to the field level, right? All of that is going to be pretty industry standard. Security 256-bit encryption, all of that is there. But looking from a scalability perspective is what tools is your organization using, right, from a whole, and does the platform support integrating and automating to those tools, right? There's a Zapier out there, there's Workato, there's iPass left and right that'll help integrate from a low-code perspective, but can you shortcut that from a platform piece? It'll cut down procurement costs, it'll cut down approval times, it'll cut down IT pushback, but on top of that is, does it scale? Right, is that remembering that from a citizen development perspective, even if you're an individual testing this out on a one-time basis, you're going to fall in love with it, period. So how are you going to get more done? Is this platform going to solve one application, or is it going to solve 100? And that's how you're going to find the scalability for yourself. And that's something I look for when we're evaluating tools, is how far will this take us past the initial use case?
Fantastic. Phil, I saw your eyes light up a little bit on this question.
Yeah.
What have you got?
I think about this stuff a lot from like a stack perspective, right? Because I think when a lot of folks, myself included, get into citizen development through whatever route, the first thing we do is we all try to find the unicorn, right? So we all spend like days and hours on like G2 and Product Hunt and Capterra, and it's like, what's the unicorn platform that solves all of my needs and will do my taxes for me, right? Like, what is like the one thing that does everything? And we find out that it doesn't exist because all of our needs are so weirdly unique in our organizations. Like, we all come with like different resources that we can pull from, and we all have different budget levels, and we all have different stacks that we're relying on. We all have different needs on those stacks and things that we have to push and pull from. And so, so we typically find that, like, for the most part, that unicorn single platform doesn't exist. So then the pendulum swings the other way, right? And it goes, cool. How can I use 15 different platforms to get 100% match of exactly what I'm looking for? And like, that's where these like Frankenstacks get built, right? Of like all these, crazy dependencies and all these teams using different things. And, because the way the teams operate on an individual and like at smaller team levels, you don't want to wait for the whole company to get on a citizen development platform, because if you wait that long, you probably won't have a job by the time something actually gets adopted. So you got to move fast. And so what I find is best is in the middle of the two, right? Which is where you accept that the unicorn doesn't exist. You don't try to have every percentage, but you say for cover the amount of platforms I can have that give me the highest amount of modularity, right? With the highest amount of coverage. That's what I tend to look for. So if I can get like 3 platforms that give me like a decent amount of modularity and 80% coverage of my needs, I'm happy. Like, I love living in that space, and I can get creative and hacky in that last 20%, as opposed to adding in 3 more platforms, right? So it's, what are the biggest needs? How can I get those needs covered? How can I have high modularity? Like, that's what I'm looking for. Like, selfishly, it's like the world that I'm the most interested in, building a tool like Switchboard that like works with like cross application stacks, right? Like, I want to make cross application stacks more robust, and so that you can have multiple applications. So that's the world I believe in.
Yeah, brilliant. Well said, Phil. I can tell you think about that one a lot. This question, I'm not sure that it's the right question, actually. What features to look for when selecting the right CD platform? There is no, or I've often heard it as the best CD platform, right? It depends. It's context dependent. What are your needs? And then align with those needs. Mike McCullough, I'm going to call him out again. He told me once, the best low code platform is the one you have. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? He said, well, sometimes like the momentum of just getting your company to buy into getting a platform, even if it's better than the one you have, is harder. And so work with the one you got, and then prove the case as to why you need something that's better. I think that's wise.
I often think about it like external use cases in that regard, Matt, right? Like in the external like product world, like you've got to build MVPs before and show adoption before venture money often, right? And so before raising budget, like you got to show that you can make something happen with what you got, right? To some level. So yeah. I'm a big fan of that level of thinking.
Yeah, that's good advice. All right, last formal question, but I'm gonna start tying it to the questions I'm seeing come through the chat because they're related. The last formal question is worded as, what are some of citizen developers' most valuable learning resources, and how can organizations best leverage these resources? And then we've got a similar question here from Rama in the chat. What types of training and support do organizations need to enable citizen developers to be successful? So Kevin, let's start with you.
Yeah, no, I from a training and development perspective, it's imperative, right? Is that the time you spend spinning your wheels trying to learn how to move a field one to the left versus going through a training program that's provided either by your company or by the platform itself. I mean, that investment in training is huge from a time perspective. And then on top of that, you're getting quality work, right? So is this going to scale? Is this going to work in 2 years? Is this going to work next week? Is this going to work for the next person, right? So all of those are questions to ask as you go through it. Great citizen development programs. Again, I talk highly from an organizational standpoint, so I appreciate Philip's perspective on an individual perspective. I think that's a really good tag team there, just to call that out. But from an organizational perspective is that you've got, you really need to tie it all in from making sure that everything is being done the right way, and right is relative to your company. And so having that support built in from the beginning is imperative. I think essentially having something like a learning management system to support your citizen development, it will just show buy-in from a organizational and an executive perspective, is that it makes it more formal. And when it's more formal, it's less risk, and less risk means there's less to worry about from an executive perspective. That gets you more projects approved, that gets you more ROI, that gets you more time to develop. And so, it's something, shameless plug here, is something that we implement and require for a lot of our programs that we do our citizen development governance through, is that soup to nuts, zero to hero citizen developer training. That is, okay, what is the business? What does accounting do? What does finance do? What is it, MBA in a box, all the way through, super complex API code for the low code platform or no code platform that's in there. And so it takes someone in 6 months or less to be a fully competent and capable citizen developer within the organization.
Fantastic. Thank you. Hugo, as a representative of a low code, no code platform, what sort of training is available?
In these days, Chat GPT. Right.
You
So-
had to go
Man,
there, right?
it only
before
took
the
us
end.
51 minutes to get to ChatGPT. That's pretty decent.
It is a word that everyone is speaking right now, right? So so for our platforms, we try to make it intuitive enough that you do not need to look up for any documentation, right? When you're trying to use any CD platform, right? As a matter of fact, nobody likes to read documentations, right? So the platform should be intuitive enough, and if it not, right, then Chat GPT or Google or YouTube, right? YouTube tutorials are my best go-to, right, in order to learn up a platform.
That's how I learned the first platform I worked on. It was videos. Yeah, I just watched videos and studied their knowledge base, which was a lot of reading. But that was back in 1864 when I got started. So we didn't have ChatGPT yet. Okay, Phil, same question, but I'm kind of leading you on this, and I was saving you till last because we're talking about learning resources. And this might have something to do with something you've developed. I'm looking at it right there on the screen. And there's a question also from Mahi about what are the communities or you see
Great
where I'm
leading
going here,
question.
Phil?
So if I'm picking up what you're putting down, yes,
Yes.
everyone for sure should join the No Code Ops community. We're a free community. It's over 500 folks in our Discord, over 10,000 folks in our newsletter. It is all people that care about the intersection of no code and operations. And we'd started it because at the time, like 2 years ago, all the talk about no code was really about being a maker, being a founder, and all that stuff's amazing. But like, we really wanted to talk about it from the thanks tree, from the operations perspective. So we host live events every single week. We just did our first ever boot camp that went really, really well. We sold out. We did a 1 month long cohort-based live boot camp on API development for no coders. That was really great. We'll do more stuff like that in the future, like more education paths. But then lastly, Pluggy McPluggerstein over here. If you haven't already, nocodeopsconf.com, sign up for the wait list. Tickets go live soon. We are doing an in-person and virtual conference here in Atlanta in September where there will be tons of learning going on. 850 people in person all talking about citizen development. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. And then I see Vivek said, we're building a community right here with CD Week, right? So I wanted to underscore that because we often think of training. We're so used to this online world and reading manuals that's where our brain goes immediately. But don't forget about other people. Like we learn from and support each other in citizen. I've not met a better community of people that want to help each other than the citizen developer community. They don't hold their skills to themselves as something to be coveted. They share and they will actually brainstorm with each other, like connect. Hey, I want to solve this problem. Anybody out there done that before? Can you give me some advice? So yes, communities. What was it? Boot camps. Coach. Find a coach. Somebody that I coach. I love to coach people. And I'm sure everybody on this panel loves to do that as well. So yeah, I'm a little overexcited about community because I think that's where it's at. But of course, you need the technical training too about the platform. The last bit that I would recommend is when I mentioned this yesterday, when I think of citizen development, I think that a healthy citizen development program includes the people, the technology, and the process. Okay, people don't know how to code, but we want to use technology to solve business problems. The technology, that's low code, no code platform. Jog it, I'm looking right at you, right? Quixie, looking right at you. TrackVia, a whole bunch of others, right? But the third piece is that process piece. It's the best practices in the governance. So I just want to give a shout out to PMI for being bold leaders who put out training on processes for best practices of app development, but also for scaling citizen development across the organization. So if you haven't checked out PMI's training materials, I am going to make a plug for it. I don't get anything for making that plug. I'm just a big fan.
Just enter promo code Matt at the checkout.
You guys are so fun. I said this is
Matt.
going to be.
Matt, I'm going to leave you with the 3 Ds and the 3 Ps. If you update it to people, process, and platform, you got a nice little ring there.
People, platform. Okay. All right. 3 Ps, 3 Ds. We got it. What are your royalties on that?
It's tied to your promo code. We'll talk about it later.
Okay. Got it. All right. We are at the end of this session. There are a lot of great questions out there, and I'm sorry that I did not get to them. I told you I am not a professional moderator. But I think we as Citizen Development Week community, we're going to look at all these questions and try to either respond to them directly or stay tuned. There might be something at the end of the week where we cover these, but stay tuned. I'll just leave you with that teaser. With that, Hugo, Phil, Kevin, I'm huge fans of all of you, and I'm thankful that we got to have this conversation. I'll let each of you leave with some parting words. Kevin?
No, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Matt, for the invite and everyone at CDW to make this happen. It's tremendous value for us as panelists. I think I can speak for everyone to be able to experience the evolution of our space as quickly and as phenomenally as we've seen. All the questions that are coming in just shows that everyone here following understands and gets the value. So let's evangelize this. Let's push for more and innovate with every company that we touch. Agreed. Hugo.
Fail fast, fail often. So citizen development, right? So it is very hot right now, and every organization is embracing this. So let's do this together. Thank you.
Awesome. Phil, the anchor.
Thanks so much for having me, Matt. Always a pleasure. You, just as a side note here, you totally kicked ass at moderating. So thanks for just just being an incredible moderator. Thanks, Quixie and CDW. So glad to see more just communities and events popping up in like the citizen development space. So this is really exciting. Thanks for having me. And yeah, go citizen development. Go build some stuff, y'all. Get off this call and go make stuff.
All right, I'm coining. Go build some stuff, y'all. You heard it from Phil. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your attendance. We'll catch you at the next session. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.